Good evening, everybody. I want to take a few minutes here and talk about an issue that's come up in a number of communications from schools to parents about HB 45, accelerated instruction, and opt-out. And this is what I call the ultimate red herring, the contention that a parent cannot opt out of accelerated instruction under HB 4545 because it is subject to compulsory attendance. This is a thing we're starting to see districts actually adopt as their position. I'm showing you an example here of an email that came to a parent from principal at Mesquite ISD. Said, unfortunately, there's no such thing as opting out of the STAR test, which we expect them to say, or acceleration as it's part of the law. We don't expect that because the TEA says you can opt out. The exact wording is here, and as you can see, acceleration is treated as compulsory attendance. And then they reprint FAQ 18, which starts off discussing the fact that accelerated instruction is subject to compulsory attendance requirements and should be treated like any other required instructional time during the school day. And that's the key to why this is such a ridiculous red herring, okay? Let's just put it out right here. The fact that accelerated instruction is subject to compulsory attendance has absolutely nothing to do with whether or not a parent is entitled to opt out of that accelerated instruction. I'm going to walk you through a quick explanation of why that is, and hopefully that will put this to rest. And if you hear it from the school, you can just look and say, I'm sorry, that is a really poor legal analysis and it doesn't hold up to scrutiny. Let's look at the actual language of Chapter 26.010, subsection A. And this is the only subsection that applies to the question of whether or not someone can opt out. Sometimes schools like to point to subsection B and say that's a limitation on that opt-out, but that's maybe even a worse interpretation than the compulsory attendance one. The only section that deals with your right to opt out is subsection A, and it says this: a parent is entitled, that's the word, entitled, to remove the parent's child temporarily from a class or other school activity. So it's not just classes, but it's classes or other school activities that conflicts with the parent's religious or moral beliefs if the parent presents or delivers to the teacher or of the parent's child a written statement authorizing removal of the child from the class or other school activity. A parent is not entitled to remove the parent's child from a class or other school activity. I want you to pay attention because this is the sole exception to avoid a test or to prevent a child from taking a subject for an entire semester. That's it. Notice, nowhere in this provision is there a procedure for the school to approve or disapprove that decision. Why? Because the law creates an entitlement for the parent to remove the child under every circumstance that conflicts with their moral or religious beliefs other than the two that are contained in the statute. You cannot import other restrictions other than the ones the school has placed in there. Notice there's nothing that says unless that activity is subject to compulsory attendance. That's not in there. And if we take a look at the compulsory attendance statute itself, you're going to see why it's not in there. The compulsory attendance statute says a child who is required to attend school under this section shall attend school each school day for the entire period of the program of instruction that is provided, and that includes an accelerated instruction program. So before HB 45 was ever passed, accelerated instruction was already under compulsory attendance. HB 45 didn't change anything about that, okay? But why is this significant? Because compulsory attendance applies to the entire period of the program of instruction. That means from the time you go to school until the time you leave. That means every little bit of it, from class to lunch to passing periods to study halls, all of that is under compulsory attendance. But if we want to be even more specific, let's consider an example that no school will ever say a parent's not allowed to opt out of. And that is, let's take the example of a biology unit on evolution, okay? A parent whose religious beliefs are such that they do not want their child to learn the theory of scientific evolution, they can use 26.010 to opt their student out of all of the evolution units in the biology class. Okay? Now, if there is anything that's subject to compulsory attendance, it is your biology class. That is what you have to be in school for. Yet, no school is ever going to look at a parent and say, oh my goodness, no, see, biology is subject to compulsory attendance. You can't opt out of that, you see. No parent and no legislature and the TA are ever going to take the position that a parent can't opt out of the biology, of the evolution units in a biology class, even though biology is absolutely subject to compulsory attendance. Okay, but here the legislature has said that the school is required to provide this. Well, guess what? The school is required to provide biology as well. If we look at the TEA's curriculum requirements, and this is the Texas Administrative Code, it is a duly adopted regulation of the regulator of the Texas Education Agency. It has the force and effect of law. The school district must offer courses in a number of areas, but one of them includes biology, which includes evolution, also required by the TEACs, duly adopted. And guess what else? Biology has to be taken to graduate from high school. You cannot get more required than biology. You cannot get more compulsory school attendance than biology. But every parent can opt out of the evolution units if they have a religious or a moral objection to them. Accelerated instruction is no different, period. The fact that it's under compulsory attendance has nothing to do with whether or not you can opt out. Because the entire school day is under compulsory attendance. Guys, if compulsory attendance kept you from opting out, the opting out statute would be obliterated because there would be nothing under the regular course of instruction that could ever be opted out of. And we know that's not the case. You can opt out of your sex ed. You can opt out of your biology for the evolution units. Anything that you have a moral or religious objection to, you can opt out of. It just doesn't work the way they say it does. And all it is somebody somewhere, probably a school lawyer or maybe a school administrator, thought, here's something we can say that will intimidate the parents. We'll say compulsory school attendance, and that means you can't opt out. That sounds really threatening. That sounds really demanding. Sounds like a heavy burden. We'll talk about how the law says it's required. Hey, don't care. All that applies to any curriculum activity that a parent chooses to opt out of. And guess what? They're allowed. And guess what? You're allowed to opt out of accelerated instruction. And guess what? The TEA knows it, and that's why they changed their FAQ to reflect that, and they continue to reflect it in the ongoing versions. So if your school ever looks at you and says, you can't opt out of accelerated instruction because it's subject to compulsory attendance, you look them straight in the eye and you say, you need better lawyers because that is a horrible legal position. It doesn't even pass the smell test. You guys have a great day. Keep fighting the good fight.